Hey everyone, I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation with me and my guest today, Johnny Joy. Johnny's an amazing guy. He's got an amazing story, and I'm super grateful that he took the time to join me today. You're going to notice about halfway through that the camera completely changes. Uh, I'm new to this. We're figuring stuff out. And we had some technical difficulties in the middle of it, and I lost my camera. It just went dead. So I had to make up a quick switch. So I apologize for that. If you're listening, you're not going to see it. Not a big deal. And if you're watching this, this is why your TV's not broke, your phone's not broke. The color changes because I switched cameras and we just don't have the same color balance on the other one. So, thanks for watching. Enjoy this episode. All right. So, welcome to Shift. This is the podcast where we talk about radical accountability. We talk about vulnerability, what that looks like in today's world, and how we can show up as better men, better husbands, better fathers, better humans. Because honestly, this isn't really a male issue, this is a human issue. So, with me today is a good friend of mine and someone that I'm really excited for you guys to hear from. And his name is Johnny Joy. He is a radio DJ with Mountain Country with all sorts of call letters. So I'll let you share that out there. But one of the top rated radio stations in the country, and he is a recovering alcoholic. I believe. I don't know. I never know what the right terminology is these days.
There's
But
no right terminology.
let's just say Johnny made some mistakes, and when he was younger, and
One or
uh,
two.
one of the things that's really awesome about Johnny is that he is super vulnerable and open and transparent about his journey. And he actually spends a lot of his time now helping others in recovery, helping others find a pathway to recovery. And I, for one, also have been sober for 18 years now. And so he and I are kindred spirits in a lot of ways. And I'm just waiting for him to have 7 more kids to catch up. And, that should, another 10 or 15 years, you should be okay.
Yeah, I'll be 60, man.
I will be 60 when my youngest is 18. So, yeah. Yeah, I've done that math. So, Johnny, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time today to share with us. Thank you for building a studio in your house so that we could do this thing
Just for you. That's
just
it.
for me.
Just for you.
Awesome.
Oh man, thank you. It's a thrill to be here. And yeah, I recovering alcoholic. I don't feel like I'm continually recovering. I think I'm continually growing. But I think I have recovered from alcoholism. I treat it like anyone would maybe treat cancer. Like I'm not being treated for cancer. I was treated for it. But I'm always on the alert. They can come back at any time if I let my guard down. So that being said, yeah, I just celebrated 7 years, 18 years, man, 18 years. That's
Yes, sir.
including nights and weekends.
Including nights and weekends.
Dang,
That's
that's
it.
impressive.
That's it.
Yeah, man, it was more out of absolute necessity than anything else. It had very little to do with everyone's like, oh, congratulations, that's so difficult, and I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, in comparison to how I was living, this is easy. This is cake. I get to sit here and do podcasts, and I get to host a number one country station in the city for the morning show. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got an amazing home. I've got my dream car, and the crowning jewel of all of it is my little daughter, 18 months old. No, 20 months today.
20 months today. You're
See,
almost
I said I
past
wasn't
the
going to do
month.
I wasn't going to do past 18 months. But now when people are like, how old? I'm like, almost 2. And they're like, oh, like this week? And I'm like, no, like in a few, just, okay, fine, just 20 months.
Yeah, it's such a crazy thing the way we math our children.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I get it. So you've been sober 7 years
7 years.
this month, if I remember correctly. You just celebrated 7.
Yeah, 2 days before St. Patty's Day.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And
I did
so
St. Patty's Day in detox, which was probably the best idea.
what's funny is when I quit drinking, mine was very similar to your situation, and they're all very personal and very different. And there's underlying truths in I think everybody's path to sobriety. For me, it was also a necessity in the sense that I was at the precipice of losing my wife and my children at the time, which there were only 2. Um, but it was stop or lose everything.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love to talk a little bit more about where you were at, what was happening for you, what's your lifestyle look, because you said like it's pretty easy, right? Like what
Yeah.
you live now compared to what you lived then, you
Yeah.
can see how like this is so much better. But someone listening to this that's maybe still struggling is probably thinking you're full of shit.
Of course.
And so I would love for you to kind of just dive into that a little bit, because I agree with you. It's easy. You just make the choice,
Yeah.
right? The hard part is whether it's 6 hours or 6 days after you make the choice, all
Right.
those triggers that caused you to drink in the first place.
Yeah.
Like you and I have talked about this, it's that thing between your ears. It's got nothing to do with the rest of the outside world.
Right.
That's still there.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, and for me, it was, mine was a gradual progression. I mean, you could spend all the time you want in AA meeting rooms and rehab, and you'll hear every story from, first time I tried to sip a beer when I was 7 years old, I was hooked, to someone that, whereas like for me, it wasn't until my mid 20s where things really started to escalate. I wasn't a drinker in high school, but mine was trauma based. It was absolute trauma based. Now looking forward or looking back, instead of trying to look forward, I can understand that. It's like Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only back. And now when I look back, it was absolute trauma. I was in the restaurant scene since I was 18 years old, probably. Well, 16 technically. I got my first job as a dishwasher, and I wasn't even a dishwasher. I was the associate dishwasher, which now, in hindsight, I realize is in fact the lowest rung on the food service ladder, is to be the assistant dishwasher.
Where were you working that they had an associate dishwasher?
Panino's on 8th Street here in Colorado Springs.
Because I too spent a very long time in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
But see, I wasn't anywhere fancy like that. Like none of the places I worked had like the crumb catchers on the table or like the little.
We didn't have that here. This is, yeah.
But I've never heard of being the assistant to the assistant of the dishwashers.
Yes, the hydrothermic porcelain care technician. um, yeah, well, as it turns out, the gentleman that was my mentor in the washing arts ended up getting fired 6 months later for sexually assaulting a prime rib. Yes.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what life is like in the restaurant industry.
Yes. If you think that those stories don't happen, I assure you they do. Anyway.
They do.
Yeah. So I stayed in restaurants for a long time. I moved up to Boulder. Well, I spent my formal high school years, like junior high school, District 12, Cheyenne Mountain here in Colorado Springs. Went to Pikes Peak Community College for my first semester, and then moved up to Fort Collins to Colorado State, where I completed my associate's degree in art history. I then moved to Boulder for a summer. That summer lasted approximately 5 years. I remember at least a year and a half, and as I recall, it was a pretty good time. And I was doing all the dumb things that a 21-year-old in Boulder does. Nothing, that you probably haven't heard of, or anything that would terribly shock or dismay anybody. I mean, it was just dumb kid stuff. Got my first DUI, standard procedure stuff, and when I was dating a girl. I'd been with her for at that point about 4 years, and I remember we were at a restaurant called Rock Bottom, and I'm sure there's a number of people that heard of Rock Bottom Restaurant. The name is very ironic after you hear the story, because I get a call. This was August 11th of 2002. I get a call, and it's from my aunt, and she lived in Denver at the time. And we're at Rock Bottom, and she says, "Hey, Johnny, you need to get down to the Springs." I said, "Okay, what's up?" She said, "You just need to get down here real fast." And I said, "Okay, what's up?" She said, "It's Julie, my sister, my only sibling." And I said, "What's going on?" "You need to get down here." I said, "Is she alive?" She said, "You just need to get down here." And I don't really remember the drive. I know I was going fast, and I got to Penrose Hospital, Penrose, Maine, downtown, and rushed into the ICU. And there I see my sister, my only sibling. She was 4 years older than me, with hoses and tubes coming out of everything, and a color of gray that I've never seen on a human being. And as it turns out, she My sister was a teacher. She had her master's degree in psych. She was incredibly intelligent, but she too had suffered trauma at the hands of my father. Abandonment. She was abandoned when she was about 13 years old. 13 years old for a young woman is tragic.
It's too young.
My mom did everything she could for the both of us, but she was engaged and engaged and broke up with 5 different guys 5 different times, and she liked pills because she again had the problem between her ears. And this time she had taken what's called a duragesic patch, which is fentanyl, in the style of like a nicotine patch. And she put one on her thigh and one on her other thigh. She's trying to get really, really high. Didn't understand the strength of fentanyl. This is 2002. And she passed out on her back and was without oxygen for about 45 minutes.
Wow.
So she was at Penrose Hospital for 4 days before my mom and I had to make the call to take her off life support, and watch my sister die in front of me. So looking back, that started this thing because I didn't know what grieving was. All I knew was like, it didn't really even hit me till 6 months later, man. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
I was too busy taking care of my mom and just trying to navigate this new world. But I knew I started drinking more and I started doing some more drugs. I moved back down to Colorado Springs because I knew I needed to be near my mom. That much I did know.
Yeah.
9 months later, I was back up in Denver visiting a friend, and we went to rock bottom. 9 months to the day, and my phone rings. This time it's my mom. She says, "You need to get to Lutheran as fast as you can." I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "It's Sean. It's your cousin, the other person I grew up with." I said, "What happened?" She had an overdose, and she had her master's in biochemical engineering. Smart woman. Overdosed on painkillers.
Wow.
And was without oxygen for about 45 minutes. And for 4 days, we sat in the ICU at Lutheran, and her mom, my aunt, had to make the decision to pull the plug. And I watched my cousin die in front of me.
Unbelievable.
So at this point, everything is just doing this inside my head. But I've always been a people pleaser. That's what I am. That's who I've always been. So I can't deal with what's going on inside of me. I have to take care of everybody else and just keep on this happy Johnny face. And it wasn't working because the bigger the wound got, the more I tried to medicate it. The worse the trauma got, the harder I tried to make it quiet down. All during this time, I was trying to finally figure out answers to why I'd been abandoned by my father, why there just wasn't that relationship there, why he wanted his stepkids and not his son and his daughter. And I never got to say the things I wanted to say and all the things I needed to say. And then on September 5th, 2004, I get a voicemail from my stepmother. She says, "Hey, your dad died this morning. I thought you'd like to know."
Wow.
Yeah. And so that, again, in hindsight, looking back, I can say that that's when it all really began.
So you and I have talked about this, and I have a idea or a belief or a thought or a theory. I have a theory that most addiction isn't what we typically call addiction. I think people are dependent, 100% dependent on drugs, alcohol, sex, food, whatever they claim their addiction is. But I think the addiction is actually to running. And what you just described is a very analogous to that. You had all these traumas in your life that are very real and very traumatic and very challenging. And what it sounds like is that you didn't have coping mechanisms or tools to, in a healthy way, figure out how to express yourself, how to grieve properly, how to manage that grief. And so instead of that, alcohol became the numbing agent, and after time you became dependent on that.
Yeah.
So what do you agree with that? Do you think that that's
100%. 100%. Because again, what my crush was alcohol. But like you said, people use sex or gambling or food or shopping or whatever it might be. Because again, it wasn't what was in the bottle. That's not what it was. That was a means to an end. It was to quiet this mess in here. And because I didn't know things about that because, and also in 2002, 3, 4, this kind of platform wasn't available,
Yeah.
where I could just grab my phone and text a buddy, like that wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it
Um,
really wasn't. I mean, what iPhones came out 2009. So if
yeah,
you weren't, an executive somewhere with a BlackBerry or we used to have, I think my first PDA was a Trio, right? Or the Treo from
yeah,
Singular Wireless.
yeah,
Um, taking it way back, right? But
yeah,
we didn't have podcasts didn't exist. YouTube wasn't a thing.
right.
And the at that time, because I got sober in 2003. But for me, I had a family, I had kids. I was in the same position. I was running from trauma.
Yeah,
My birth mother died when I was 3. My father was physically abusive. My stepmother was emotionally abusive. So for me, it was not dealing with all the stuff that I had to deal with because I didn't have tools. And alcohol was a great, you know, numbing agent for that. And I never got into drugs. I was told as a child that my mother committed suicide because she was a drug addict, and I found out in my 20s that she was murdered and that it wasn't a suicide. And that's a story for another time. But
wow.
I grew up under this cloud of not knowing why my mother passed or why I wasn't good enough or why all these things that I just had no way to deal with it.
Yeah,
And then I lived with my dad and my stepmom who were ill equipped for the child that I was. So I think and my story is not unique, right? I can talk about it very openly because there's no hurt there anymore. Like I've resolved it, I've healed it in
yeah.
many ways. There's still things that come up and I'm like, "Oh, hey there. I thought we were done." And we get to have a conversation and then I move
Yeah,
on, right?
yeah.
But there's so many people that are dealing with similar stories, and I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing what like was there a point for you during because so we're talking 2004-ish when you kind of went off the rails,
Yeah,
and you've been sober 7 years, so I suck at the math, but you know uh,
about 11 years.
2013-ish you got sober, so
Yeah.
for 11 years you were hitting it pretty hard to a point where you were very chemically dependent
Oh,
on substances. Was there a point for you in that journey where you knew and you were like, I'm an alcoholic, I'm dependent? Because for me, I was like, when I quit drinking and I was a bartender,
yeah.
and I went
Wow.
back to work the next day and I worked behind the bar. I never had the shakes, I never wanted to drink, I never felt, you know it was just for me when I would go drink, I would drink till I blacked out.
Right.
But I didn't drink every day and I didn't need it. It was
Yeah.
I was escaping from in other ways, right? So I'm
Yeah.
curious what that was like for you. No, like were you able to go, I know this, or were you in a really long stage of denial, or what does that
Oh,
look
that
like
was
for you?
a long stage of denial, and boy, you missed quite an adventure. It's it's quite the thing. Because that's the thing is when people say is alcoholism a disease, if you're talking about the emotional piece, again, another conversation, we might get to it here, we might not, I don't know. But physically, true alcoholism is absolutely a disease. Luckily, it's curable, um, but it's dangerous because it almost killed me 5 separate times. Um, there was. It's interesting though, Keith, that you asked that because I look back now and I say I can't believe I did that and thought it seemed like a normal, sane, natural idea. I.e., I was out of booze, but I was shaking so bad in the morning from DTS that I thought, well, I better just drink that Listerine because
Wow.
that'll calm the hands down enough for me to get to the liquor store. You know,
And that didn't
um,
seem like a problem then?
no, no, and that's what's so crazy. But that was at the end. I mean, this wasn't something that I kept up for 11 years. I mean, it ramped up. Probably really got bad about 2009. I was married previously, and it was very short lived. I can't say I necessarily blame her. I wouldn't have necessarily been wanting to be married to me either. We all have our faults, but I'm not here to pick on her.
Sure.
But I remember we took a trip to DC, because here's another funny thing: is you take someone with a major drinking problem and a lot of unresolved trauma, and then on my 30th birthday, I was given my inheritance from my grandmother, which was about $550,000.
Oh, wow.
So, a number of times you hear people say, "Oh, if I just had money, I wouldn't drink." I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah, no,
I
I mean,
promise you, you will. And then you do things like, let's go to DC for the weekend.
that
Let's
is
go
a
to Mexico
recipe
for the
for
weekend.
disaster, my friend.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And I,
Wow.
I remember, I'll never forget, every time I see a picture of the Lincoln Memorial, I remember I couldn't divulge this to my ex at the time, but I was in such bad DTs because I hadn't drank that morning. I couldn't barely walk down the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and everyone thought I was having a stroke because I was holding on to the rail.
Wow.
And we got to the hotel, and I remember just having to, and like I couldn't even pick up my drink because so I had to do it like that. And then the next morning, I remember having to talk to the bar manager down in the hotel lobby and convince him to sell me a bottle of wine that I could open up in the bathroom of the lobby and chug the entire bottle of wine just to, yeah.
Function. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, it's. Did I ever? I no, I didn't really realize it until I finally decided to make the decision to get sober. Because all the previous times, all the other rehabs, which were 4 rehabs, 3 times in county detox, over $200,000 in rehab costs, I was getting sober for everybody else. I was doing
Yeah.
it for either my ex or my mom, or because people thought I should. But when I closed my eyes at night, I was still just me and my brain, and it was
Yeah.
ugly neighborhood to be in. And on that last time, and it was March 13th, when I decided to go, in March 15th, 2014, when I finally got sober. I was laying in a hospital bed up in Denver, and I knew that I was getting ready. Like I told my mom, I said, "I'm going to die. You're going to bury your second kid, your only other child,
Wow.
if I don't do this." And I was laying in bed, in the hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling. I had a BAC of 0.54,
Wow.
which, yeah, pretty
It's what,
pretty serious.
four times danger
Five
zone?
times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amy Winehouse died with a 0.41, and I was at 0.54. So, um, and I remember, as loud as you and I are talking right now, I heard a voice say, "It's done." Right? It's done. It's done now. Not another minute, not another second, not another day. It's done now. I said, "Okay, I'm ready to go." And I checked into West Pine up in Denver, which is a detox place. I was also taking a lot of benzos at the time, like Xanax. So
Yeah.
Xanax, about 8 bottles of wine a day, 4 Xanax a day, plus a 12 pack of beer was what I had to do to stay level. And that was without a doubt the hardest 4 days of my life, emotionally and physically. I've got a note still next to my bed upstairs. It says, keep it in just a little thing, just in case I suddenly have a little glimpse of, like, you know what? I think I'm okay. And it just says, "Remember how bad you felt when you wrote this." And you can
Wow.
barely read it because it's just, yeah, I mean, throwing up blood, the whole deal. And then right when I got out, and I got the alcohol out of my system, and the seizures were done. I'd been hospitalized for a grand mal seizure previously. I mean, my organs were failing. It was a damn mess. I mean, I escaped out of Penrose Hospital by ripping IVs out of my arm, running down the stairwell. I mean, the things that we go to when this is still all twisted. And this time, when I was finally done, I said, "Okay, I can't figure this out on my own." And
Yeah.
something out of my own hand saved me, that says, "I'm trying to quit and he's not willing to fire me, so I got to figure some shit out." And that's
Yeah.
when I said, "It's time to find counseling."
That's
That's what I
awesome.
did.
Yeah. I mean, because that begs the question, when you're at that point in your life where you're consuming, I mean, most people can't drink 8 glasses of water a day, let alone 8 bottles of wine a day. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just did the 75 hard challenge over the fall, and you had to drink a gallon of water a day.
Yeah. Oh,
And that
yeah.
was easy for me, but my wife did it with me, and probably 3 days into it, she was like, "I can't, this is driving me crazy. It's too
I'm
much."
drowning here.
So literally, you're right. So like just hearing you say you would consume that much,
Hmm.
um, I mean, one of the things comes to my mind is like you had to have been within 50 feet of a bathroom at all times. And like the expense of that, even on the cheap stuff,
Oh, yeah.
is got to be something that was tricky.
Well,
Cause
that's
I know
what I
from
was. Yeah, it's what's I was pulling this up right now as we were talking. I've got this app, and it's not something I check in every day on. Only when like milestones are coming up. I'm a numbers guy, somewhat like where like there's cool. I'm not a math guy. I like numbers. I don't like math.
Yeah, I don't do math, but I like
But yeah,
data.
so today would be 2,573 days sober, and you kind of plug in how many drinks you were having a day, and so far, and just a little over 7 years, 76,290 drinks not had,
Wow.
76,000, and money saved $415,650.
Wow.
Yeah. Now there's this one picture I want to show, and hopefully the camera can grab it. This is I woke up one morning like this, and I went to bed alone. I don't know what happened. I'll never fully know what happened. But I woke up and my face was really sore, and there was blood on the pillow, and I couldn't quite figure it out. There was a broken glass in the living room, and I had a wraparound bar in my living room because why?
Why
Why
not?
not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I looked in the mirror, and this is the day This is 3 days later when I checked into rehab. Now the dark colors you're going to see here are not shadows; it's bruising.
Wow. Yeah, that shows up.
Yeah.
That shows up.
And so, yeah, I've got a plastic plate under this eye. I fractured my eye socket in 3 places. I fractured my cheek, my jaw. And the very first place I went when I looked in the mirror, I went to the liquor store. And ironically, I lived about 2 blocks away from Cheers, the liquor store, where everyone knew my name.
I bet.
Yeah. And I mean, I would take exact change in there so I wouldn't have to hold my card. I knew it was exactly 2201 for
Wow.
my box of wine. I had
Wow.
it all planned out. And I walked in and they go, Jesus, Johnny, what happened to you? Oh, I slipped and fell at work right on the cutting board. I didn't have a job. Yeah, it's crazy, man.
So, man, so I want to get into like what recovery looked like for you,
Yeah,
because this is the type of dependency most people don't come away from.
right.
And at the same time, this conversation and this podcast is really all about radical accountability. And so you've
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
taken accountability for yourself. You've definitely been in a vulnerable space to share your story and to take ownership of your stuff.
Yeah.
But as you're talking, I'm curious about your thoughts on what role the people who worked at Cheers, the people who worked at the places you went and drank, like they had to have known that there was a problem, because
Right.
I was a bartender, and I was a bartender when I drank. I was a bartender when I got sober, and I actually quit bartending intentionally because I leaned into not AA or any other sort of rehab. I leaned into Buddhism and Eastern philosophy to get sober,
Okay.
to really start to look at suffering and how to deal with my own personal problems and things of that nature. And one of the part of the eightfold path is right work. And so for me, and I don't mean that bartenders are bad people or anything like that. So I don't want to, you can get off the keyboard. I'm just saying, for me personally, at that time in my life, I felt like I was enabling other people to not take responsibility for their stuff.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I could do a different job. And so I quit bartending. And I have other friends who bartend, and I don't look at them and go, "Oh my gosh, you're horrible."
Right.
Because my dad has asked me many times, if I was going to open a business, what would it be? And I've always said a bar or a liquor
Yeah.
store,
Yeah.
because no matter what, bars and liquor stores are making money. If things are
When things
great,
are bad, they're great. When things are good, they're great.
yeah. When things are bad, I got to have a place to go numb my whatever. And when things are good, I got to have a place to go celebrate. Right. So if I was able to just put my money somewhere and not worry about where it came from, that's the best business model ever, because it's
Yeah.
always going to have, as we've seen during this pandemic, when liquor stores are deemed essential for people who are in a position like yours, where I can't get through the day
Yeah.
literally without that chemical. But what have you ever thought about that or considered it? Or
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting because it was a couple of years ago now. We went back into Cheers, my wife and I, because I've got no problem going into a liquor store. Like, my wife
yeah,
drinks.
same here.
I mean, it's hilarious because like my wife will sit there and say, well, because she's dealt with addiction in her family, and she's like, well, I just never want that to happen to me, and she'll drink like half of her margarita at a restaurant, and I'm like, sweetheart, you're safe. I assure you, If you're an alcoholic, you don't leave a margarita. You don't leave half of one. I was eyeing that guy's beer and her half glass of wine, your margarita. But we went into Cheers, and the same guy that used to always check me out, I think he's the general manager there now. He saw me and he just stopped dead in his tracks, and he looks at me. And I told him, I was like, "Hey man, it's good to see you." I said, actually, I think it was like 4 years sober at the time. And he goes, "Man, we just figured you died."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was like, "All right, fair, you know." But here's the thing, though, Keith, is like addicts, we're great at hiding this too. Until the end, until like that last 6 8 months, the people that were around me then that I hadn't chased off, they knew for sure, and they've been trying to talk to me. Like I was losing jobs and losing relationships, like romantic relationships. Um, but I mean, I was running the Cheyenne Mountain Resort. I was running the Mine Exchange Hotel, wearing a suit and tie with a box of wine in my truck. You know, I had a jar of pickles there. You'll swish some pickle juice around in your mouth, keep chewing some gum, and then when you work in hospitality again, if you got a little wine on your breath, well, no, it's just up at the bar. We were doing wine tasting. No big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Because I was never really getting drunk anymore. Mine
Yeah.
was just maintenance. Yeah, so I mean, I thought about that, and for the group of people that really knew that I thought didn't know, it's sort of like when you have that bad girlfriend in like high school, and you're like, I finally decided to break up with her, and all your friends are like, "Thank God, bro! My
Yep.
God!"
It's
And you're like,
about
really?
time.
Why didn't you tell me? And that's how
Yep.
it was. Like I finally came out to like my friends and was like, "Hey guys, I've had a drinking problem for a little while, and I think it's time to get sober." And they're like, "Yeah, you think?" They're like, "Thank God," But again, it's one of those weird conversations, and I think that's what my whole goal is, to make it not weird anymore, because
Yeah.
it's not just people in AA. It's not just people that are like brown bagging it in the park that are the addicts. It's the doctors and the lawyers and the pilots and
Yeah.
your brother, your uncle, your aunt, your grandma. They're all having these problems. So the more we can talk about it, then the less we have to hide it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like we're coming into a part of the culture where it's a lot easier to talk about these kinds of things. It's why I feel called to do this podcast and to share with people about what it means to face your demons, what it means to really take accountability for your stuff. Um, and for such a long time, and in many ways, it's still this way, and in many ways, it's gotten worse. But it's been easy to whitewash or justify, or because I just got to blow off some steam, or I got to do this, I got to do that, and I really want to work towards people having those types of relationships where your friends and mine who knew that I had a problem or who were covering for me with my wife, like I want to create a space in my relationships where those people come to me and say, "Hey dude, that's not okay."
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I had guys that would, call my wife and say, "Hey, he got held up at work," or whatever, and text her, and give her information that was just enough for me to keep the lie, right? Um yeah, I mean, I feel like it's important that we create those types of relationships where people can hold us accountable and say, "Hey, you're screwing up here." And that's hard. Like it's hard to look at your friends and say, "Hey, I don't think that you're presenting yourself in the way that you actually want to present yourself."
Yeah.
Because when I quit drinking, what I found really interesting was I would get off work and then come home. And I was in the restaurant business, and people were used to, you get off work and everybody goes and has a beer to unwind or to blow off some steam or to, talk trash about the customers.
Right.
Sorry, restaurant workers, we're throwing you under the bus, but that's what we do. And, it's I would just go home, and it was probably 2 or 3 weeks into it, with me choosing not to drink, where one of my friends called me and he was like, "Hey, we haven't hung out for a while. What have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, I quit drinking." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And that was it.
Yeah.
Like there was no, "Let's go catch a movie, let's go golf, let's go for a run, let's just hang out." It was, "Oh, well, then I guess we won't see you anymore."
Well, like they say, if you want to know who your friends are, get sober.
That's it.
You know,
Yeah.
and again, there's nothing wrong with that because there's some people where I'm not saying that like every friend I hung out with was a raging drunk like me that could like put down a bottle of Seagram's VO and not bat an eye, feel fantastic in the morning. But sometimes it's just a lifestyle that goes along with it. And I just, yeah, I mean, I don't have the desire. Like I can go to bars, I've got no problem. Like it's
Yeah.
fine. But if
Yeah.
when we're the sober people on the sideline and you're watching everyone else kind of get hammered around you, you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I find myself not, I can go to a bar. I don't feel anything, um, really about like my own experience. I'm
right,
fine. What I find and why I don't hang out at bars anymore is because I feel like I want to pull everyone aside and have a heart to heart with them
yeah,
and
yeah.
talk to them about what's really going on. And they're not ready for that. Right.
No,
So
no,
I don't, I just don't. I have friends who drink and we keep beer in our house because we have
yeah,
family that, wants a beer on barbecue, when we do the family thing. And I got no problem. Like, and no one comes to our house and gets, smashed and
no,
that sort of thing. But it is interesting how we use, and in some cases it's food, and in some cases it's entertainment, Netflix, Instagram, Facebook, all
yeah,
of those things as a way to numb and escape from the real world.
mhm,
And what's really interesting, and I know you've dove in a little bit, but I am absolutely falling in love with Clubhouse right now because they are the most real and raw and intelligent conversations. It's like that it's like a dinner party that they used to have in the 50s where all, and again, it's centered around alcohol, right? But all the guys would get a cigar and a scotch and they'd go sit down and they'd talk about world politics and world events and
yeah,
they would dissect what was going on. And that's what I'm finding on Clubhouse. And it's because in some ways you're never going to see these people.
right.
People are being really honest and raw, but in a kind way, not like Facebook where you can just throw out an answer and bail. It's been an awesome experience. And I wonder if we're not seeing the dawn of an age where talking about our problems and our issues and our challenges isn't starting to shift into normal, right? It's not being normalized because I want to be a part of that movement.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely, and that's I've adopted your phrase, and I don't probably I don't name drop you every time I use it, but the term radical accountability, I'm just in love with, man, because it sums it up. And that's people are terrified of that phrase. People,
Yeah.
they're afraid of accountability because it's forcing them to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
You um, it's a lot easier to blame. It's a lot easier to point a finger than it is just to say, what is my role in this?
Yeah.
How have I affected other people? And how am I reacting to what other people are saying or doing?
Yeah.
And
There's
that's a
a
big part about sobriety is just figuring out how you're reacting to the world around you.
Yeah. I there's a guy, a pastor out of Atlanta called Andy Stanley. He runs North Point Church out there. And I listen to his stuff on occasion. And he over the summer talked a lot about owning your slice of the conflict pie, which was a phrase that I really fell in love with because it's exactly that. Like not only is my reaction part of that conflict, but my actions that played a role in that. And then I've sort of been shifting that into as I've been marinating on that for months now. How can I stop reacting and start responding? How can I have a measured response? How can I take a breath and try to recognize the bits of the conversation or the dynamic that I don't understand, accept and like admit that I don't understand it? Because I think that's part of the huge problem we're facing right now is that people aren't recognizing that they don't understand and they're just holding fast to that which they think they know,
Right.
which isn't really true, right?
Right.
And it's not that it's wrong, it's just that they only know a bit,
Right.
right? And I mean, it's really one of the reasons why I think people's stories like yours are really powerful and really important because, you know, the loss of life that you experienced is enough to drive anyone to drink. You know,
Sure.
we would say that to lose two to lose a family member, especially your sister, you know, a sibling that you're that close with in that manner is traumatic. And then to have another family member, and then, you know, even though your dad and you didn't seem to be on the best of terms,
Right.
you it's still your dad.
Well, that's it's like this. Very few things do I have regret about in my life at this point, because I'm, as you know, and you are as well, a massive student of personal development.
Mhm.
Because this is a crazy garden up here, and if I let the weeds start going, they'll overtake the garden real quick.
Yep.
But yeah, with my father, it's regret, and I try not to have regret. But that's one of those things that I'm just like, man,
Yeah.
yeah. But of
Yeah,
course,
I feel the same way with my stepmother. My dad is still around, and we've had the opportunity to heal and resolve a lot of our issues, and I love him dearly. And I don't know if he'll see this or not, um, but we're good, right? Like, I don't
good.
like everything he says. I don't like everything that he does, and I know he doesn't like everything I say or do. But I love him, and we're good. I never had the opportunity to resolve the relationship with my stepmom, and I do regret that. I've often said I don't have any regrets. You know, it's all the things that brought me to who I am, and I think there's some truth in that, and that feels really good. And at the end of the day, if I could go back and do it differently, I think I would.
Yeah.
And that's part of, I think, getting into that accountable space, right? So, um, tell me a little bit about what it was like after the hospital, because you get to this place where you're on the precipice, you're going to die, you hear this voice that says it's done, and you know, I would say that that's divine intervention,
Yeah.
and I would say that that's probably a very, you know, life-changing experience. But the reality is you go back to your life and you still
Right.
have this thing between your ears, and you still have the same thoughts, and you still have the same darkness, and you still have
Yeah.
to figure out how to deal with it. So what was that like for you?
Well, it was very similar to the first time I got like really sober. I moved out to Newport Beach after I got sober. I lived in Newport Beach, California, for about 6 months, and I was
Okay.
going. I was living on the beach. I mean, it was a sober living complex, just a bunch of guys and a couple giant grills, and we'd have a meeting every day. And then the only requirement is we went to one AA meeting every day. And otherwise, I just rode my beach cruiser up and down Balboa, and I rode out to the beach. I went to AA meetings with Robert Downey Jr. and Anthony Hopkins and Rob
Wow.
Lowe, actually at these meetings. And then I come back to the Springs and I'm riding
Yeah.
my mountain bike down Uinta to go to the Nooners meeting. It's not as sexy. And
It
Rob Lowe certainly was not at that meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. So it caught up to me pretty quick. And same time on the second round, but I knew that this time that I had, and still do. I've got plenty of relapses left in me. I just don't think I've got another recovery. It'd be easy for me to go upstairs right now. There's a bottle of the $200 bottle of tequila sitting right above my stove. If I wanted to, I could
Yeah.
go down. Um, but it was divine intervention, yes. Counseling, absolutely. I
Yeah.
dove in as fast as I could, and pretty much I asked my mom to stay with me just to keep an eye on me until I started to really get my footing. Because after 4 days and this was a medical detox. I mean, I had DTS for a month,
Yeah.
where like it was a constant reminder, um, and I knew that I needed to talk to somebody that realized I wasn't that damn special.
Yeah.
Someone that had seen stories that made mine look juvenile. And there's a guy named Dr. Gary Forrest. He's here in town, and he's called the Alcohol Guru. Two doctorates in addiction, and he was the first guy. I remember the first day he like looked at me and he just said, "So tell me why you can't pull your head out of your ass." And I was like, "What? No, I want a
Yeah.
hug and a high five. That's what all the
Yeah.
other
You
places
want to
do."
be the victim. You want someone
Yeah,
to tell you that it's okay that you're an asshole. And it's not.
no,
It's
and
not.
it was interesting because the recliner he had in his office, old school, big leather with like the metal rivets all the way around.
Yeah, yeah.
The armrests were so completely torn up, and you could just tell it's from so many people sitting there just digging their fingers in, just digging their fingers
That's
in.
hilarious.
He's like, and I won't repair it for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. He
very
wants
up
people he
top.
wants
People would
people to
just,
see.
yeah, it'd be like,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know,
Um,
that's
yeah, so that was the first big part, was getting that therapy of somebody making me be accountable.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I want to push a little bit because
yeah,
as you're talking about this, you shared that you had this nice inheritance that
yeah,
came along, and you're down in Balboa or
yeah,
Newport,
yeah.
and you're hanging out with all the guys.
Mm,
So for someone who's watching this or listening to this, that may come off as a little privileged.
yeah,
And well, I don't have the ability to go do that, especially now because this was, 7, 8 years ago,
yeah,
and it's only things only get more expensive in California. I mean, you can't hardly,
yeah.
drive through the state without dropping a couple grand. So
Right,
I'm curious because I know you work in this space now where you help people in this situation.
right,
So what what would you say to that? Like, I don't have that kind of money. Like if we were to
right,
role play a little bit and I'm an alcoholic looking to get fixed and you're like, well, you need counseling. Okay, that costs money I don't
yeah,
have. Well, you need rehab, that costs money I don't have.
right.
And I just start going into, you know, victim mentality, man. Like I
Yeah,
lost my
yeah,
job, my wife hates me,
yeah.
and you're telling me to go spend all the money I don't have
Right,
on stuff. It's like,
right. Well, to backtrack for a second, by the time I got to Newport, my ex-wife had cleaned me out. I blew $250,000 in a year. Um,
that's fun.
yeah, and then but one good purchase I did make was a house I bought for in cash. And luckily she couldn't get her hands on that. So by the time I went to Newport, I had about $150 in my account. But there there are, to go even to the place I went to was by the grace of God and my mom having some money that she was able to put me through up in Denver, which then she helped me out in Newport. So yes, if you don't have the money, I get it, because that does come off as a privilege. Oh, you're riding your bike up and down Balboa.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, no, God, I live in Cleveland and it's dark and it's gray and
Yeah.
I'm depressed.
Yeah.
That's where, now you utilize these resources, because while you're sitting here on this, looking at someone else's TikTok or their Facebook, and you're looking at their highlight reel, you could be plugging away and finding groups like this of people that are there saying, hey, look, no, I'm there with you. And that's that accountability piece, instead of sitting back and saying, I need life to get better, so I'll just go ahead and wait.
Yep.
It's not going to happen like that.
Yeah. It-
I luckily have the ability to have made it through, those ugly parts, but I relapsed after Newport. I
mm,
relapsed. It didn't fix shit because this wasn't fixed.
yep. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
think that's
that's,
why you see guys like Robert Downey Jr.,
yeah.
who are in and out, have all the money in the world, have
Yeah.
all the things, or people like Robin Williams who unfortunately take their own life
Yeah.
because they're not able to fix the thing, right?
Yeah. Right. And that's, yeah, 100%, and until I was able to untangle the knot between my ears with counseling and a guy in an old beat up leather chair in an office from
Yeah.
1970 that said, pull your head out of your ass, that things finally woke up
Yeah.
for me, and yeah, I could have had $1 million in the bank account or had no dollars, which was the case when I finally saw
Yeah.
him. And
Well, I
that's
love
when,
that you shared that because I think in listening to it, people tend to make excuses. Um, And when they hear someone else's story, because I've shared my story and people are like, yeah, but your wife didn't leave you. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. She didn't.
yeah,
And that doesn't mean that she didn't have divorce papers ready.
yeah,
And it doesn't mean that things were great between us. What it means is that she stayed just long enough for me to make the choice and for me to do the work. And I've often shared with people privately, like she's the best thing that's happened to me. And like I wouldn't be who I am if not for her. And she's the
sure,
first one to correct me and say, and she's the first one that would wear that badge of honor, right? But she's
right,
the first one to correct me and say, no, you did the work. I just didn't leave.
right,
And that's really the big thing that I try to get people to understand is, and I love what your counselor said to you. which is why can't you? Because
Yeah.
it isn't anyone else's fault. It isn't anyone
Right.
else's problem. I was blaming my parents, my sisters, my jobs, anyone and everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And it was when I realized that I was the problem, there was a sliver of victimhood, but then it was very empowering because I was like,
Yeah.
well, if I created this mess and it's a big mess, then I'm pretty powerful. I could probably clean it up.
Well, that's the whole thing is I am my worst problem and I am my only solution. I'm my only
That's it.
problem. I'm my only solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So if you're
I
watching this
love,
or you're listening to this and you're in that position, talk to somebody, get some
yeah,
help, take ownership of it, be brave enough to say, I don't know how to do this. There
yeah,
is a tremendous amount of power in saying, I have no power over this.
of
Right.
course. Absolutely. And that's, when I talk to people about wanting to get sober, I have to say to them, and this is before I'll even start to help anybody. I'm like, do you want to do this for you? And they're like, no, I need to do it for my wife. I'm like, nah. And that's before we shift gears here. Jim Rohn, who you're very familiar with,
Hmm.
obviously,
Yep.
mentor to Tony Robbins, and I mean a whole litany
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
amazing thinkers. He
Yeah.
had this to
Legendary.
say: he said, "If you have pennies, you start with pennies. If you have nothing, you start with nothing. If you've got handicaps, you start with handicaps. If you're ill, you start ill. If you're young, you start young. If you're old, you start old. If you're behind, you start behind. You just don't make any excuses."
That's it. Yeah. It's super powerful. And it really is, regardless of where you're at. Cause I was nowhere near the level of dependency you were. And it doesn't make my experience any less hurtful or painful or
Absolutely
real.
not.
And both of us, with these different experiences, came through it with the support of others
Yeah.
after we made the choice for ourselves. And for me, selfishly, and I almost feel bad sharing this, when I tell the story, because my wife is usually in the room. I got sober not for my kids; they were the catalyst for me. I got sober for myself because I was going to lose my kids.
Yeah.
I expected to lose my wife. I didn't have examples of healthy marriages that lasted 25 years.
Sure.
So when I got married, I hoped it would last. But
Yeah.
if you said, what's the over under? I probably would have given you a number. Right.
Right.
And so I feel bad saying that, and that she recognized, she'll hear this, she'll know this, but the fact that she stayed with me hoping, and she said, she saw something in me. She knew I could do it. She just, and I mean, she had divorce papers ready. I got real lucky that I made the choice, probably at the 98-yard line of that experience. But it's crazy to me to think about how much people won't accept it. And I understand there's chemical dependency, and I understand that there's things happening, and that there is a process, and we do need to treat alcoholism and drug addiction and chemical dependency as an illness, because it is. It may not have started that way, right? I don't think it starts that way. It starts as mental illness. It starts as an inability to address the problems that are going on in our world. And there's there's this tension right now because I see so many people getting away with things like political. I believe in our culture, we're watching people not get held accountable for their actions. And so whether it's subconsciously or subtly, our culture is becoming one of, it's not my fault, it's not my job. The most popular answer to somebody saying, this is inappropriate behavior is, well, he did it. I'm like, what
Yeah.
are we, two? Like that doesn't work with my 5-year-old. Why am I going to
Right.
allow it amongst adults? But that's our response is, well, the last guy did it,
Hmm.
or you know, the guy up the street did it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that what does that have to do with your inappropriate behavior?
Right. Well,
And
yeah. I mean, by the way, I got you beat. I got divorce papers in rehab. Yeah.
see,
On family night, 2 weeks in, I was down in Pueblo, and she came to visit me, and
wasn't that sweet?
Yeah. But the real
Well,
kicker for us guys out here, and ladies too, if you have a car aficionado, if you enjoy classic automobiles, I got back to the house and my 1971 NGD Roadster was missing from the garage.
mm,
That was the thing that really pissed me off. The divorce, not so much. But don't take my sports car.
don't take my stuff, man. We like
Yeah.
our stuff.
Yeah.
This is interesting because I've known you for a couple years and I didn't know that you had been married before.
Yeah.
But what I do know, and I kind of want to talk about this if you're cool with it, because I think it's a really cool story. And I just think it's a cool story. There's something in there that struck me, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But your last name is Joy,
Yeah.
and that is not your birth name.
No.
And it is not a name that you just picked out of a hat and decided I'm going to be joyful.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of funny how it worked out. This is my third last name.
Okay, so
Yeah.
tell me more.
Yes, I was born my birth given last name, and this is where you realize your own mortality. My birth given last name is Armit, Armit, one letter away from armpit. The second spell check became available on computers was probably 6th or 7th grade, and so the fun began. You know,
Yeah,
I was
that made junior in high school real fun, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it was blast. Well, people even elementary school kids knew it was armpit. Hey, armpit. But that was my father's last name. Now there's a section of Evergreen Cemetery here in Colorado Springs, which is a huge cemetery, but back over by the Founders, where the old school folks of Colorado Springs are buried. There's 4 other gravestones that say John Armit. My great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father. And then I looked at my
Wow.
driver's license and I'm like, John Armit. Ain't that some shit? I'll be darned. But I was supposed to be John Lee's Armit the Fourth. But my mom wanted me to carry on her maiden name, which is Emerson. So I became John Emerson Armit. That's what I was born with. Emerson, as in Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yeah.
Some people know the poet, some people don't. He is my great uncle, which is kind of my claim to fame there.
Very cool.
Yeah. But so I became John Emerson Armit the First, and when I turned 30, and it was after my father died, I finally realized to myself, I said, you know what, I don't want Armit. The only living Armit at that point was my stepmom, and
Okay.
there's not many people I will ever not try and pursue a relationship with but her. That's done. It's over. I can call it what it is. So I decided it's time to separate from that last name. So I took on Emerson, and so it was just John Emerson for the longest time. And then I met Amanda, my wife, and her name is Amanda Joy. And I met her on Match.com, and I thought to myself, you know, Joy, like that can't be her real last name. Sure enough, it was her real last name. And working
You've
at the
seen the
radio
documents,
station,
you've seen the paperwork, you verified it.
yeah, exactly. And working at the radio station, everyone started like teasing me because I just started dating Amanda. And they're like, "You're going to be Johnny Joy," and I'm like, "That's the dumbest name I've ever heard of. I'm Johnny Emerson, and she'll be Amanda Emerson." And well, as it turns out, she made a concession. She said, "How about I take on Emerson as my middle name, and you take on Joy as your last name?" She's like, "Because I really don't want to give it up. And when we have kids someday, I want them to have parents with the same last name."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm in media, Johnny Joy. Okay, I'll do it. She's going after her doctorate. She just announced to me in the next couple of years, so she will officially be Dr. Joy.
I
Again,
love it.
way more badass than me. Way more badass than me.
Yes.
But the funny thing is, I've always been gone by Johnny. From being a bartender on, I was just Johnny. I was Johnny the bartender.
Yep.
But my birth given last name is John. And now so my driver's license says John E. Joy. John Emerson Joy.
That's it. You're Johnny Joy no matter what.
Yeah, I'm Johnny Joy. I'm Johnny Joy. So on my new business cards for Mountain Country, it actually says John E. Joy. And people are like, "I thought your name was Johnny Joy." I'm like, "It is.
It is. Yeah.
I don't know what you're reading, but it's right there." Yeah. It was too cool of a last name, and it meant a whole lot to Amanda. Emerson didn't mean as much to me. Like last names to me, they're titles, and it really meant a lot to her. And I said, you know what? Let's do it.
I think that's an amazing story. And I am often reminded of the gratitude I have that my wife took my last name.
Yeah.
Like that's a big deal. I don't think it
Yeah.
gets enough.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets enough sort of praise or admiration that when two people get married, one of those people literally changes their identity. It doesn't
Yeah.
define them, sure, but it is a thing to, and I've got six daughters and two sons. And the idea of I've got one daughter who's already said, when I get married, I'm not taking his last name. Like she loves her name and
Yeah.
she's like, I'm not giving it up. And that makes me proud. And then I see my wife and I'm like, you took my last, and that's a big deal. And so when you shared that story, I thought, man, that's a pretty vulnerable thing, because married couples who aren't the same last name, there's always a little bit of a, well, why not? Like, is she a
Yeah.
celebrity? Is she this? Is he that? Like, why aren't they one? Right. And that you were sort of courageous enough, because I think there's a little bit of, like you said, it didn't matter much to you, but there's a persona and there's a perception out there, right?
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely.
you took your wife's last name, and
Yeah.
not just because it's cool. Like, I mean, it's and then you've got a podcast now called
Yeah.
Addicted to Joy,
Yeah.
which I highly recommend you guys check out. It's amazing, and there's really great stories from all different types of people who've battled addiction and overcome addiction. Um, the first season was great. I'm really excited for you. Uh,
Thank you.
I might be a little bit biased because I had something to do with the creative artwork involved.
Yeah. Well, and you're going to be a guest in season 2. So, I mean, there's
Some
that,
point,
by the
well,
way.
yeah. Well, thank you. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in addition to the podcast and the radio show, you have a new project that I'm super excited about, and I was hoping it would be available to talk about, and then I noticed you promote some stuff the other day. So
Yeah.
talk to me about this new project, because I think people who are listening will dig it.
That kind of came about is when I was working at the Mind Exchange, worked with a great AV guy, and he took care of so many different properties. He made all these really great videos, and we kind of lost touch after I left there and got sober. And he called me up, God, about 2 or 3 months ago. Excuse me, and he said, "You've been following me on Facebook and social media. Never once commented on anything. Never even liked anything. One of the guys is just like kind of peeking through the blinds at all times,
Yep.
which is more often than not." And he said, "I see what you do with inspiring people and your story about sobriety, and you're so open about this. I want to make a show with you." He's like, "Here's the network I'm on. I developed it. We have over 100 million views on 3 different shows. Each show we do gets about like 10 to 12 million views." I'm like, and he showed me the analytics. I was like, wow.
Wow, that's great.
Okay. He's like, "So how can we mix cars and sobriety?" I'm like, "Well, they're easier to operate." I mean, that's just basic. And so I kind of turned to social media, another useful time that social media kind of really came into play. And I just asked everyone, I said, "What would be a show you'd want to watch if it involved sobriety or recovery of something, and vehicles?" And so with just all these little snippets, I kind of came up with this idea. I would be a fool to not call it Joyride,
Well, I
honestly.
was gonna say, I mean, you take on the name, like you got to leverage it at every turn,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah.
and
Addicted
it
to Joy,
just
Joyride.
fits.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and yeah, what we're going to be doing is I'm just going to be getting a really cool car. Could be a classic, could be like a new Tesla, and we're going to pick up somebody that has overcome crazy odds. And it could be addiction, but it could be, I mean, think of just the amazing heroes we have here in the military bases in Colorado
Yeah,
Springs. It could be the single mom, that was living in a shelter and is now the CEO of a company, whatever it is. And we're just going to drive around in a really cool car, and they're going to tell me their story.
I dig
And
it.
we're going to go for a joyride, and we're going
Yeah,
to maybe go to their high school and show like where they had their greatest moments or their hardest moments. Drive by the jail. I don't know. It's going to be mostly unscripted, and
yeah,
it should be a lot of fun.
that's awesome. So, what's the timeline like on this? Do you know?
Looking at a couple months out still, probably. We want to make sure that this is done right, and we have a
Yeah,
proper sponsorship, so that everyone's taken care of. That the production company can earn a little bit of coin as well. Uh,
yeah,
if I can pay a utility bill by driving around in a car, I think that's about the coolest darn thing that could have ever
100%.
happened to me.
Yeah.
But even if I just get to go drive around in a car and just listen to people's amazing stories,
Yeah.
and
I
I'm
don't know
making
if it
a
makes
dime
up
off of it,
for,
I don't care.
yeah, I don't know if it makes up for losing out on the sports car, but
I got that back, by
it's
the way.
good. There you
Yes.
go. See, so there's a happy ending to pretty much
Yeah,
the whole
she
story.
she left at the attorney's office with the top down in the rain, but
I
you
love
know,
it. I love
it's like
it. Um,
that's a Hallmark movie.
you it is. It is. You mentioned social media, which I know you're on quite a bit, and you've kind of made a bit of a name for yourself in sharing very positive stuff, really staying out of the noise, ignoring sort of the mess
Trying
that's
to,
going on.
trying
And
to.
even
That's
when you dive into it, though, you have a positive spin on it, or you're asking real, genuine questions that are meant to seek understanding, as opposed to like, you know, shame or belittle anyone else's opinion.
right.
I talked about this on another episode where I understand why people don't like Facebook,
Hmm.
and I understand why people don't like, social media. And it always circles back to me for like, that's because you're choosing to use it poorly. Like, I,
Yeah,
I mean, right now, this is probably my third or fourth interview that I've done. And of them, only one of them was a person that I hadn't met through a social media platform or connected. You and I met in person, but we connected through social media.
oh
We
yeah,
got to know each other. We liked each other's stuff. We enough so that we were like, "Hey, let's go grab coffee. Like, I want to know you more as a person." And I believe it is because I choose to use it as a tool to grow and learn, right? I could use it as a distraction. And
yeah,
it's funny to me because I hear people talk about how much they hate Facebook, and I get censorship and algorithms and, manipulating things to their own advantage. But the reality is it's a business, it's a company, and
yeah,
companies are in the business to make money for shareholders. So
right.
if when we start to lose sight of that and we start to think that like we're special and we're not just a product, that it really can be a powerful tool to affect change, or at the very least to help yourself grow. And
Yeah,
I know that's sort of the way that I see your social media usage. I'm wondering if that's intentional, and I mean I think it is, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
yeah. If you go back and look at my, the remember this day, and it's like 2009, 10, 11. I'm just like, ew, ew.
Same. a hundred
Yeah,
percent.
yeah. But yeah, when you open up my Facebook, like, and I'd hand anyone my phone at any given time, because the same thing when people say, I hate Facebook, it sucks. I'm like, what are you following? What are you reading? What kind of seeds are you planting? Because the
That's
first
it.
like 4 or 5 things I have on the show first, you know, are Goalcast, Bright
Yeah.
Vibes, Tiny Buddha, Jim Rohn, Tony Robbins. So before I even start my scroll and hear people, whining about how their Mocha Foca Chapo Waka from Starbucks was undersweetened and how it ruined their whole day, I've
Yeah.
already planted seeds of stories of courageousness and thought leaders and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Again, it's like if you are shocked that you got trash juice in your mouth while rooting around in a dumpster, well, the problem here is
You were in the dumpster.
you're in
Right.
a dumpster.
I mean, I wrote,
If you can't stand certain people on Facebook, don't follow them. You don't
don't
have to
follow him.
unfriend them, but
Yeah.
but you're calling it to yourself.
Yeah.
And I did that for a long time, and I find myself every once in a while getting down into the muck, and getting ready to throw blows verbally, and I'm like, but that's where the personal development side comes in and say, is this a hill worth dying on? What am
Yeah.
I about to do? Because
Yeah.
zero problems have ever been actually solved on Facebook. Yeah, I've never
Yeah.
once been like, you did change my mind politically.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you hit caps lock.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you for that. And the 14 exclamation points were better than just 6.
Right.
That
Yeah.
was helpful. That was so
Yeah.
no, and in my experience, I have had my opinion maybe not changed, but it's been altered or shifted a little bit
Well,
through
that's with the
conversations I've
people
had.
you follow, though.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I've started to follow some of the people you follow, and
I,
that's where you have good conversations.
yeah, I mean, I'm very open in my social media that like you can say whatever you want, don't
Yeah.
make it personal, and I'm not backing down. And it's not
Yeah.
that, and I'm never, and I've said this before. My goal and my intent when I engage with someone is not to change their mind. It's to understand their position.
Mhm.
And I will ask questions. And I hope that we get to this place in this podcast is, I'm learning how to do this thing where we can have conversations where we're not going to agree and we're not going to necessarily, you know, see eye to eye on things. But at the same time, like I ask a ton of questions because I'm a learner. My like if you're familiar with Gallup's strengths, learner is my fifth strength, which is my anchor strength, which means everything I do is kind of pushed through a filter of learning. And so I'm always trying to seek to understand. And sometimes that comes off as arrogance or like me asking you a question may seem like I'm challenging you. And it's not that I'm challenging you, it's that I'm asking you to help me understand where you're coming from. And what I find where people get defensive and angry and start to make it personal is when they can't answer a question about what they believe because they don't really believe it. They're just
Right.
parroting what someone else has told them, and they've chosen that that's my
Yeah.
team, that's my side, that's my group, and
Right.
so that's the company line that I'm going to toe. And when you say, well, tell me more, they switch to leave me alone, you're a bully.
Yeah.
No, I'm just asking you to help me understand why you believe what you say you believe.
Right.
And it's the conversations like that where I had a mentor of mine talk to me about and teach me how to put everything on trial for its life, right? Like we have all these ideas that are thrown at us. Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard, Jim Rohn, like we talked about. These guys are throwing ideas at us, and I don't think just because it comes from Tony Robbins, it's gospel.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
something that I want to take, I want to play with, I want to use, and I want to go, that works or that doesn't work for me. And
Yeah.
maybe it'll work for me in another season.
Right.
Maybe I'm just not ready for it. But I think most people just go, well, Tony Robbins said, and or Jesus Christ said, and it's like, wait a minute,
Hmm.
let's peel that back and let's test it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's an interesting concept to say, well, this thing that's an inanimate object that's under my control is ruining my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
not sure how that works.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is like, it's pretty interesting. The one community so far in the entire U.S. now that has been shown, this came out yesterday, that has achieved herd immunity from COVID is a
Okay.
small Amish community up in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
because they they weren't on these, they weren't on this.
Yep.
Obviously, they didn't have network news on. Some people got sick.
Yeah.
You kept their churches open. COVID ran through the entire community. A few people died. Most lived. They have herd immunity, and they were never scared.
There you go. Yeah.
And and that's the thing, is like people are like, but I'm so scared. Then turn off the TV.
Yeah. It's
You know, how many times are you going to keep touching the stove expecting for a different result?
it,
The news isn't here to educate us anymore. There
it's
are no
not.
more. There's no more Walter Cronkites out there. Even in my profession of radio,
Yeah.
it's used to there. We have hook lines that we use all the time. At Mountain Country, we don't have a corporate entity that overlooks us, which is very great.
Yeah.
So we
Privately
don't have to.
owned.
Yeah, but like we're gonna be like, wait till you hear what somebody found in the bottom of this sewer coming up
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.
Yeah. It's
You know,
amazing to me because we think of, I had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day. We are allowing, we allow ourselves to become manipulated by whatever we take in.
oh yeah,
And that can be news, it can be music, it can be food, right? And it's like everything that we ingest is going to have an impact on us, whether we like it or not. And so for me personally, like I've not watched network or cable news for over 5 years.
yeah.
And a lot of times I get my information from social media, and I'll hear somebody post something, see, or somebody post something, or it's a trending topic. And so rather than me going, "Hey Billy, tell me what happened," I go to the internet and I'll read three or four different news sources, and I just read the facts, and I had someone the other day tell me, "Well, I only read the headlines." And I was like, "Well, that's that's the problem, because the headline is meant to grab your attention.
Yeah,
And the headline is often not, I mean, not only is it not the whole picture, it's often inaccurate
Yeah.
intentionally because it's got to be sexier. And, you know, sex
Yeah.
sells, blood sells. You know, so it's funny to me when people go, well, I only read the headlines or only saw, you know, and I think it's okay. Like it's totally okay to go, you know what? I don't know enough about that. I saw the headline, but I didn't read anything, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Versus saying, well, the headline said.
Yeah, well, even this morning we're looking about stuff to talk about. Nothing groundbreaking. People are done with COVID. They don't want to hear about it. So I'm scrolling, and this article pops up, and it says NASA just declares the Earth is asteroid safe for the next 100 years. And I'm thinking, that's great,
That's cool.
terrific. From then, when you read the article, it's safe from one asteroid they were looking at that will pass by twice more in the next 100 years.
Right.
So they believe from that one we'll be safe.
We're good.
The other ones,
All the other that we don't have any idea how many there are because we
yeah, there might be an earthender out there. But yeah, so but sure enough, their little ploy worked because they got all their ads on the side of the screen. Once I click that little link, and I'm sure I'll see it in my Google feed just for talking about it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's pretty fascinating to me what we allow ourselves to experience and then we blame for our experiences.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I wrote a book literally about you are the result of your choices. And if
Right.
you're unhappy,
Make better
make
choices.
make different choices.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that's what I do whenever I have the opportunity to help somebody. I mean, the very first thing I do, and it's not, this isn't groundbreaking. It's sort of like Simon Sinek, and he talks about, he's like, I am embarrassed that I have a job because there should be no need for my services.
right.
You know, but like I tell people when, you know, someone's like, I'm drinking a pint of vodka a day, blah, blah, blah. There's a gal I'm helping right now. She's in her mid 50s, and now she's down to a quarter of a pint a day after a week, when she was drinking 3 pints a day, and she's doing it on her own, which is pretty unfounded. But she was
Yeah.
serious. She wanted to quit. And it all started off with me saying, take a piece of paper, divide it down the middle. On the upper left, write benefits I get from drinking. On the upper right, write negatives I get from drinking, and then fill it out honestly.
Yeah.
And there's usually like 4 or 5 typically, you know, for the benefits, like helps me relax, takes away the pain, helps me sleep, makes me a better dancer, and I'm better at pool. And then the negatives,
Yep.
and I'm like, you have to write it down, because then when they write it down, they're just like, huh.
Yeah. And do you even like pool? Like, it makes you better
Yeah.
at pool, but do you even like it? Like,
No.
that was my thing. Like, I found I could do certain things when I was drunk
Oh yeah.
that I've never done since I got sober
Oh yeah.
because I didn't like them to begin with. I did them because
No.
other people were there, and the only reason I needed to be better was to impress those people.
Right. It's like
I didn't
dancing.
really enjoy them.
I don't
Yeah,
like
it's
dancing.
amazing, man. I think that's a really great place to wrap up. Um, I do want to ask you one question,
Yeah.
which is, what's the best $100 you've spent in the last 12 months?
YouTube Red.
YouTube Red.
Yeah. That's where it can run without your screen being on,
Ah,
and there's no commercials, and it's $15 a month,
all right.
because I can just hit motivation, inspiration, and it will just
Ah,
go, and it will go. And so I don't have the TV on.
okay.
I work in radio all morning. I don't need to hear any more George Strait, and I don't feel like listening to today's music. I want to listen to people that have a lot to say.
Yep.
Yeah. And so yeah, if there's $100, yeah. Besides a really good dinner with my wife, we went on a date night over the weekend to a
Yeah,
place
you
called
guys
White
love
Pie.
pizza. You
Yeah.
guys are pizza aficionados.
Yes, I gained that from her, and it's a place downtown, local business that just opened up,
All
and
right.
I think for a pizza and drinks for her and dessert and the whole thing, and then just 3 hours of just her and I together. I think the tab was after tip about $98. So that would be,
Fantastic.
yeah.
I like that answer better than YouTube Red.
All right.
But it's your money, man. You do what you got to do. See,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
funny because you say this, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I really dislike YouTube, and I'm replaying the last 10 minutes in my own head, going, well, what are you watching on YouTube? Because then you talked about how you're watching these things, and I was like, yeah, see, YouTube is not the enemy. It's really because I have a 6-year-old amongst my army of children, and what she watches is not what I want to
Right.
hear. So
Right.
I'm trying to figure out, and maybe you know this or not, because you've obviously done the dance with YouTube. If there's a way for me to block specific YouTube channels and just let them listen to the stuff I want, which is not how I want to parent, but you know what I'm
No.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
there's times where I'm like, guys, no, just turn it. I can't take it anymore.
Yeah. You can set up individual accounts for them and then just for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because every once in a while, like, don't get me wrong, because there are those times where, Kennedy is just like losing her mind, and I'm like, I need to do your hair because we got to get out the door. And so
Yep.
if 30 seconds of little baby bums singing Wheels on the Bus is going to get you just to sit still for a second, I'll do it.
Nailed it. Nailed
But
it.
but occasionally I'll go from like Jim Rohn is saying something, he's hitting me like this, and Tony Robbins and all 6'7" of him is blowing my mind. And then suddenly it's Wheels on the Bus.
Yeah.
It sneaks in. It
Yeah,
sneaks
it sneaks in. I get
in.
you. I get you. Well, I love
Yeah.
it, man. I appreciate you so much. Do you have any parting words, any last thoughts, anything you want to share with anyone before we wrap this thing up?
Um, just a quote from my good buddy Tom Chenault, and he says he's celebrated 28 years of sobriety, I think, recently. He says, "All I got from my sobriety was everything."
I love it.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah, and I appreciate you, man. You know that your wife, your kids, your family, and thank you for making me a part of your a part of your tribe. I appreciate you very, very much.
The feeling is mutual. Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.